Today is March 21st, 1984. This is Todd, an interview with John Bain. Mr. Bain, where were you born?
I was born right here in Broken Bow.
And when's your birthday?
Birth date was March 12th, 1921.
1921. Who was your father?
My dad was John S. Bain.
And your mother?
My mother was Stella Bain.
Were they both from Oklahoma?
My mother, they both lived in Oklahoma when they married. My dad was born down in East Texas, and my mother was born in Arkansas, over not too far from Malvern.
What part of Texas was your father from?
He was from Leon County, down below Palestine, down there about 20, 30 miles.
Yeah.
A town called Centerville.
How come they came to Oklahoma?
Well, my dad came up here about during World War I. He had some friends that he grew up with that were in business in Broken Bow and Ida Bell, and it looked like one of them was going to be in World War I. And my dad was he was a bookkeeper, and so these fellows who were brothers, they asked him to come up and help run the business during World War I. And then he stayed with them and worked for a while after that.
What kind of business was it?
It was hardware, and I think they sold some furniture and that sort of thing.
And how come your mother came to?
Well, my mother, her folks had originally gone out in New Mexico, out to Roswell. That was back during the days when the only only way they could help tuberculosis patients was take them to a high, dry climate. So her mother was a victim of tuberculosis, and the family moved out there, and she passed away back in the mid-teens. And then after she was gone, then my grandfather had a sister that lived in this area, and she thought maybe they'd like to come back this way. They wanted to get back a little bit closer to Arkansas, I guess, and so they moved from New Mexico back here in about 1918, somewhere along in that area.
What are your first memories of Broken Bow?
Well, I guess first memories of Broken Bow probably would be the streets, of course, weren't paved during those early days. And of course, I started to school at the old Ward School, which was in the middle of a housing development now. There's no traces of the old school left there. And, I don't know, things were just kind of a matter of time passing, so as far as specific things, it'd be hard. I went to school just like all the rest of the kids did. We didn't have a car to drive to school. We walked back and forth. We lived in town.
What did Main Street look like?
Well, Main Street had some trees along there. I remember particularly in front of Cheryl's Pharmacy there. There was a place where some of the people that would go to town and sit around and talk and whittle would sit under those trees out there. And of course they would grow because there wasn't any concrete streets. And I guess the trees still stayed there up until the time that the main street was paved. And I don't know, my guess would be along about probably in about 1928, something like that. And of course it was building. There's some of the buildings that are still there that look very familiar and look very much like they did at that time.
Was Broken Bow a camp town for Dierks?
No, Broken Bow actually wasn't a camp town. It had begun to, of course, I think started because of the lumber industry or timber industry activity in here. But actually they started, there was camps for a while, but they immediately started building a permanent town, and wooden buildings, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I don't remember most of the brick buildings, bigger brick buildings that are in town now, have been there about as long as I can remember. The older type buildings.
Mm-hmm. When did Dierks first come in this area?
Well, Dierks came and established this mill here in 1912. They came to Wright City first. They established the mill there, and then they built the railroad over into Broken Bow and established this mill here.
When did they
It
establish
took
in
them a couple of years.
When did they establish in Wright City? What year?
Wright City was 1910.
1910.
Yeah, I think it actually started in about 1909, but the closest railroad was at Valiant, and so they started building from that a railroad from that point back this way in order to move some of their equipment in.
Mm-hmm.
Machinery and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then
How come
they
they
came on to Broken Bow.
Yeah. How come they came to Oklahoma?
Well, there was some logging or timber activity here prior to that time. There was let's see, I always have a little trouble with the name of this company, but I believe it was Pine Belt Lumber Company that was a little bit west of here. And they came in and did a lot of cutting, and then they left. The Dierks people came to Petros, I believe was the name of it. It was a little town up close to Heidner up in LaFleur County. They were in the lumber business or lumber yard business, retail lumber yard business in Nebraska and in Iowa too. They originally settled in Iowa and they moved over to Nebraska, some of them. And so they were looking, I think, for a source of supply of lumber for their retail lumber yards. So they came to that point, and then they finally came on down to DeQueen, Arkansas, and they branched on out into the Indian Territory. They bought a mill in DeQueen. I believe it was Williamson. They've been Williamson Brothers mill over there first, and then they also bought one down at Waterman, Texas. I'm not just sure exactly where Waterman was at that time. In fact, I don't think the community is in existence now. But they came on over and got these established in Oklahoma, and so the original mills were in Wright City and Broken Bow, and then there was one in Arkansas, over at Dierks, Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
Now Wright City was more of a lumber camp town, way it all started out, I think, and then they, of course, built permanent housing there for the employees, and up for a long time, Wright City was strictly a company town. There wasn't anybody that lived in it that didn't work for the company. The businesses were the commissary, and it was strictly handled by the company there. But then on up toward, I guess up in the 30s or 40s and World War II, then it began to kind of fade out, and there was some stores in town.
In World War I, was there much prejudice against the Dierks? Because they're a German family, aren't they?
Well, yes, they're a German family. They came, the original, this Peter Henry Dierks, I think, is the original head of the Dierks clan. No, you ready?
Yeah.
So they named the town of Wright City, of course, Bismarck, And then during the war, I suspect probably that there was some animosity toward them, you know, being of German descent. But anyway, they named it after a Wright, is his name, W-R-I-G-H-T, who was a member of a family there in Wright City, and he'd lost his life in the war, so they named it after, well, I understand it, after him. And I never did hear, after I grew up, I never did hear of any animosity toward the Dierks family, you know, due to the fact that they were of German extraction. But there might have been at that time because things were pretty tense, of course. But I don't think anybody ever held it against them, you know, after the war was over.
Have you ever heard of, before statehood, people coming in from Arkansas and Texas and poaching trees, cutting the big hardwoods?
Well, no, I really haven't. That's kind of, I thought they probably had enough over there, and they, but I really don't, Joe. I haven't heard of that, but it's entirely possible.
Yeah. What about is there much poaching going on today?
Of timber?
Yeah.
Oh, very little. I don't think it's much. For one thing, it's hard for them to, you know, anybody to get out in the woods and do very much for any length of time without somebody kind of knowing about where they are, because there's more roads and so on. It used to be, you know, when having the roads up there, well, you just wouldn't see anybody probably. But in this day and time, I think it's very, very unusual for that to happen, and I don't see any cases filed hardly in the area. I can't think of but about one case that I can think of in the last few years.
Yeah. You say you started the school in Broken Bow?
Yeah.
What year?
I guess in 1927.
Okay, what was the name of the school?
Yeah, it's just a Broken Bow primary school, I guess, was the name of it. It was the only elementary school that we had, you know, for the beginner school.
Yeah. How big was Broken Bow in those days?
Well, I imagine probably, I'd say back then it was probably in the neighborhood of around 1,500 people, something like that, because of course the main industry in Broken Bow was the mill over there, and there was their employees, and then quite a few other businesses around developed. And I'd imagine that probably 1,500 people would be just a strictly a guess. But
how'd they get the name Broken Bow?
well, the Dierks people, as I mentioned earlier, had originally come to Walnut, Iowa, and then the descendants of the older Dierks that started it all, they branched their operations on into Nebraska in the retail lumber business, and they put in a lumber yard in a town in Nebraska. Its name was Broken Bow. In fact, it's still, of course, in existence, Broken Bow, Nebraska. And my understanding is that they took the name of Broken Bow in honor of their town that they had. Some of them even grew up in, you know, the descendants grew up in Broken Bow, Nebraska, and so that's how it all started, the way I understood it.
Oh, I forgot to ask, what kind of work did your father do?
My dad was a bookkeeper. He was a bookkeeper. He kept books. That was his main
Who did he
job.
work
He
for?
passed away. Well, he worked for these Harrison brothers back until about 19, and I guess probably, well, I'm not sure, about 1920. He died in 1924, and along about 20 or 21 then, he went to work for a grocery company that was here there called Kegel's. It later sold out to the Wootons, up on the corner where Cheryl's Pharmacy now stands.
Okay. When did you leave high school?
Well, I got out of high school, graduated from high school in 1940, and I was around until worked for a cleaning and pressing shop down there until 1943, and Uncle Sam beckoned. I was in service for about 3 years. I didn't have any overseas service. I lost an eye back when I was a youngster, and consequently I never did go overseas.
Yeah.
But I spent most of my Army career was spent within, probably 40 or 50 miles of Broken Bow, Nebraska. I was assigned to an air base at Grand Island, Nebraska, which is about 80 miles west of Omaha, and I spent a good part of my time there. It was a processing base for European-bound B-27 crews mostly.
Okay. So what were your duties up there?
When I was in service,
Yeah.
I was doing clerical work up there. I worked in the message center, and I worked with the base sergeant major in his office, and that was the main thing that I did so far.
Were there any big celebrations when the war ended up there?
Well, I don't remember really a specific celebration. I do remember that, everybody in the service, they were counting the days till they could go home. But so far as a big celebration in town, in Grand Island and so on, I don't really recall that there was anything real spectacular, but everybody was glad and relieved when the war was over.
And after the war, you come back here?
Yeah, I came back after the war, and I went back to work for the cleaning and pressing shop where I had worked before I left. And I stayed for a little while, and I wasn't too satisfied. We put in a little neighborhood grocery store, and I stayed with it. We kind of got it going. Then, let's see, I came out to this Harrison, one of the brothers that was in business, that my dad came here from Texas to help. One of those brothers was in the lumber business and had gone into the lumber business in the meantime, and he bought a planing mill. And so he asked me, he was getting up in years and kind of in bad physical shape, and he asked me to come out and help him. I didn't know anything about the lumber business, but he was pretty good, and he guided me, and I stayed in the office, worked in the office mostly for him. And, I don't know, we sold lumber, bought rough lumber from the small sawmills, and then it was processed in the planer there, and then we would sell it to companies that would come in there, send their trucks down and pick up a load. So I stayed there until about 1940, the latter part of 1948, and in the meantime I had been friends with W.H. Bill Mitchell, who was assistant state forester in charge of fire control for the state of Oklahoma. He and I were in the Lions Club together, and we associated quite a bit, and he told me once before if I was interested in going to work for the forestry division, or to let him know. And so Mr. Harrison, the lumberman, his health, as I mentioned before, had gotten kind of bad, and he decided to close out. So I went to see Bill, he told me to, and I think it was during the week, and he said, well, come start the week before the first of the month, and he said, come on back the first of the month, and we'll be ready. So that's when I went to work for the State Forestry Division, and I've been with them ever since. That was 1949.
49. What were your duties when you first worked with them?
Well, I was district ranger when that's the way I was hired. I worked with the field people mostly, and fought fire, and sort of kind of kept a lot of the field people supplied with things that they needed in the way of fire rations and tools and different things. I helped kind of kept up. Of course, I hadn't had very much experience in this, but I did make up work programs for them, and they'd tell me what they needed to do, and I was kind of kept the program coordinated with people. That was in the area west of Glover, between it went clear up into the southern part of Leflore County, down to Little River, and later on down actually to Red River, north and south, and then east and west it was from the Arkansas state line to all roughly east of Glover River.
How do you set up a fire prevention program in forests like this?
Well,
Excuse me, John, here's your radio.
All righty, that's fine.
Sit right there. Thank you.
Okay.
See y'all tomorrow.
All right, ma'am.
Forest fire prevention is something that's kind of hard to deal with. It's a more of a long-term public relations job in my estimation than anything else. We've back through the years, there's been the common practice of burning off the woods, and a lot of people thought that the thing to do was to burn them off in the spring, and that the grass would be better, and so that was just kind of a custom. Some of them were every year burners, some of them were every other year, and so on. That was one of the biggest things that caused our forest fires. And then we had a few fires that were caused by grudges against the landowner for some reason or other. They felt like they'd been mistreated some way or other. Some of them did it, they wanted to burn it just, I guess you'd call it, just for the heck of it. It was something to do, and they didn't have anything else to do, and they just go out and set fires. Well, the fire prevention methods that had to be carried out there, the first thing, and the thing that you naturally think of would be law enforcement, because there was a fire law in the state of Oklahoma, or has been, since the very beginning of fire protection. But it was almost impossible to get a conviction of anybody for setting the woods on fire. And in most cases it was one person's word against another, because when a fire burns and burns everything up, there's not much physical evidence left there. Anyway, that didn't, so far as preventing fires, that just didn't work out to stop the thing. It was strictly a matter of education and going through a period of time when people would realize that they were burning up the future timber crop, the thing that would actually make people a living within the country, or in the area. And so some of them began to realize that, and then the incidence of fires has gradually gone down as people began to be aware of this. And the job was a public relations job to try to make people aware that that was the reason they shouldn't go out and set fire. So I think that education thing has done as much as any other thing. And of course, with the fact that there wasn't too awful much of Weyerhausers up until, Dierks land that had been actually planted and that were plantations. They operated pretty well on selective cutting method. And so when a fire burned through there, consequently, they'd kill a lot of young trees, but it wouldn't wipe it out. It would gradually come back within itself. But since Weyerhauser's been in, and they use the even age management, in other words, they go ahead and clear it all off, and everything that grows up within that area is going to be about the same age. Well, if you get a fire in that stuff, you've got a lot of investment in preparing it for planting, clearing it off, preparing it for planting, getting it planted, and then of course the years of growth that it gets on it. And it's a pretty darn expensive fire anytime that a fire gets into one of those things, because they're killing fires until, at least until the thing gets to be a good many years old. Yeah. So that makes for another problem that we didn't have back in the early days. So they still have the problem of getting convictions, and law enforcement, and still they're working more and more in the schools and getting out public information on damage and everything, and it's all working. But our fires that we have in this day and time, with as many clear cuts or even age stands, and the damage it does to them, and the amount of money that has been put into them, makes it a lot more expensive than it used to be.
Which is the best program, selected or clear cutting?
Oh, well, that's really a question that would kind of weigh, in my estimation, weigh on who was doing it. I mean, now you take a big corporation like Weyerhauser and so on, with labor costs and all those things. If they can get a stand of timber up where they can go in and harvest that thing, and harvest it as a tract or a stand of timber rather than as one log, well, it saves them a lot of money. And that's the reason they're managing it as an even age stand, because they can treat it, they can just go off and leave it, keep fire out of it, of course. And then when they want to come in and make a cutting, well, they can go in and harvest it with machinery and so on back. But the selective cutting was a matter of going to the individual tree and taking out this one and that one and leaving this one over here. And it's a lot more expensive that way, because they can't do it all at one time. So if an organization is big enough to do what Weyerhauser is capable of doing with the modern equipment and everything, well, the even age stand is more to their advantage, because they can harvest it cheaper. And where if it's a small owner that has time, and they don't have the resources and the money to put into making it an even age stand, and they don't have the money to get the big equipment in there, well, they can manage it on a selective basis, and it's probably better. There's less disturbance to the environment and a lot of things like that. But after all, anybody that owns anything that they're making a living from, they've got to handle it in the most economical way for them, and that's the reason that's the way we have to look at it.
Yeah. When was the State Forest Department set up?
Set up back, I believe it was 1927 when it was originally set up. Then that was not too long before CCCs came in, up in the 30s.
Did you do any work with the CCC?
No, I was just a little bit young for CCCs. In fact, I was still going to school when the CCCs were established, and I had a job then when I got out of school, and I never did go into CCCs, but there's lots of people that did. There was a lot of local people, you know.
How many camps were there around this area?
Well, there was quite a few. In this county, there was, let's see, there was one at, here in Beaver's Bend. They built the original facilities of this park. There was one at the game preserve, or what's now the wilderness area, McCurtain County Wilderness Area. There's one up there. There was one at side camp at Eagletown. There was one at Wright City. There was a camp at Baptiste. There's one at Idabel. I don't know, I lost count there as I went through, but I think that's most of what was in this particular county. And then over in Neshoba there was one. And one over at Stapp in LaFleur County, southern part of LaFleur County. There's probably some more up there that I don't know. Building fire trails, fighting fire, building fire trails. The one at Idabel was more of a soil conservation thing. They worked on the old, well, it was a lot of farmland that was in south of Little River, an extreme southeastern part of McCurtain County and the state too, as far as that part of it was concerned. But that was down in Tom area and back this way toward Idabel. But they were the land mostly was land that had gone back for taxes. People during the Depression couldn't pay their taxes on that land down there, and it was just more or less reverted back to the county for the taxes. So the federal government went in and they set up this, I believe they call it land utilization project. And they started trying to kind of do something about the erosion problem, and it gradually kept working. It was established, and they, well, I think after World War II, when most of the planting was done, but they started planting a lot of that stuff is just laying out. They started planting trees, and of course it's what is now Teoh district of the Ouachita.
How big's the Teoh district?
I'm not sure about the acreage in that, but I think somewhere in the neighborhood around 35,000 acres, I think. I used to know what the figure was on it, but I'm not real certain.
What? The Ouachita Mountains. What's the people around the country don't believe we have mountains like this in Oklahoma?
Yeah, that amazes a lot of people that have never been in Oklahoma. They think of Oklahoma in terms of a big wheat state, cowboys and oil wells.
And Okies.
And Okies.
John Steinbeck.
Yeah, John Steinbeck. But actually, we've got some pretty rugged country in southeast, well, in eastern Oklahoma, you might say. It goes clear on up. It's still pretty hilly, you know, way on up on the east side, all the way up into...
How old are the Ouachitas?
How old? Oh, I can't tell you offhand.
Are they formed by... were they made by uplift or erosion?
Uplift.
Uplift.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my understanding.
And it's also my understanding that Ouachita is the original spelling of the French word.
Yeah.
Because we have Ouachita, Wichita.
Right.
I guess it's pronounced Ouachita. Then we have Ouachita, Wichita, and I don't know what else.
Yeah. Well, I know. I guess that's about as close. Let's see. I think there's a Ouachita that's actually spelled, like the English.
Like Fort Ouachita.
Yeah, Ouachita. Yeah, W-S-H-I-T-A.
Yeah.
And then the Wichita is W-I-T-C-H-A. And this was this range was named by the French, apparently.
Well, as I understand, this is the way the French spelled it,
Yeah.
with the OU.
OU, yeah.
And everything else is just a bastardization of
Yeah,
the French word.
Yeah.
Well, when you first started working, you say you work with the fire control.
Yes,
What'd you do then?
Well, I pretty well worked with the fire control most of the time until I came to the Forest Heritage Center. I actually was with the fire control organization, but I did a lot of work around, it's mostly in fire prevention, around over the state. And then we used to have what we call volunteer fire clubs. It was similar to the rural fire defense that we have now. We had some of those that were organized, and I kind of worked with those and training and keeping a scant supply. And then I guess I kind of wound up as more or less a kind of an assistant to Bill Mitchell, who was in charge of fire control for the state. But he had his office here at Broke-Bow up until the time he retired. And until he retired. And so then after he left, they did put fire control chief in office in Oklahoma City, and broke the organization down into 2 or 3 areas: the northeast area and east central area, and the southeast area. And so I was given the job as fire control officer then for southeast Oklahoma, and we had 3 counties in here, parts of 3 counties: Pushmataha, Choctaw, and part Choctaw County, and McCurtain County. And that's what I did up until the time then that this Forest Heritage Center came about, and they needed somebody to come up for that, and I was beginning to get a little bit old to get out and chase smokes and do a lot of things I'd been doing. And I had always, back during my career, I had taken care of fair exhibits for the state and that sort of thing. So I'd had a little bit of experience so far as exhibit work was concerned. And so they put me up here, and I've been here ever since. I was here by myself for a while, and then Dale Campbell, I'm not a professional forester. I've been in forestry, most of my working life in the timber industry and in forestry. But they felt that they needed a professional forester, and Dale was available, and he came up then and stayed a couple of years. And then he went with the Oklahoma Forestry Association as the executive, he's executive director, that's right. Mm-hmm. And so that put me back in charge, and in other words, I've been here since the thing opened up in 1976.
Okay.
And it's been I guess a kind of a fun thing, really, because I've enjoyed it up here. It's been been a nice challenge, and I was able to put some of my experience to work up here.
Whose idea
forestry
was the center?
Well, I'm really not real sure about the particular person. I think it was kind of an outgrowth. Actually, I believe my understanding was that an area forester that was sent down here back in the 60s, late 60s or early 70s. I guess in the early 70s. His name was Dave. I have problems with names. Dave Hensley, and he was quite a organizer and so on. And I've heard that he was the one that had the germ of the idea, but there was a lot of people that he was associated with around through his work that were outside of the state organization, private. They were in private businesses, and they all kind of got together on this thing and got it going and developed it.
Is this under state parks or the forest
It is.
department?
It is. It's actually all the assets are, as of about 2 years ago, belong to the Division of State Parks. We had it for the first part of our existence. We had a lease on 10 acres here. That is, the Forest Heritage Center Board of Directors did here in the park. And they operated the thing from maintenance clear on through, but we had money problems and so on, and so finally it was worked out where the state parks or state tourism recreation department would take the thing over, and they would get the revenue from admissions and that sort of thing, and they would go ahead and maintain it. And that part would be theirs, and they were to contract with, since it was a forestry organization, they needed people with knowledge in forestry, and so they contracted with the State Department of Agriculture Forestry Division to go ahead and handle the interpretive program. And so that's what I'm doing here, is that I was already here as a contribution from the State Department of Agriculture, so I have continued to go ahead and function now through this. So we handle the program and they handle the maintenance.
Okay.
And also the Board of Directors of the Forest Heritage Center, the original board, which got this thing built and got it started and on its feet, they are still in existence in an advisory capacity. And they have been very helpful, of course, at the time they were running it and since, and they help us keep things going, and it's actually, you might say, it's kind of a three-way operation. The Forest Heritage Center Advisory Board, they're in advisory capacity. The State Forestry Division, they handle the program for the Tourism Recreation Department, and we all work together and get along fine. And it's this Forest Heritage Center, the thing that astounds me is the fact that there's been so many people that have been interested in it, and they've brought in artifacts, and they've helped with various things. There's been quite a few donations that have been made, both to the building and since. And so it's we've just gotten so much stuff that one or two persons couldn't have accomplished this. It's just a joint effort of cooperation. It's really been, I think, something.
Question.
Okay.
How do you organize to fight a fire?
How do you organize to fight a fire? Well, I guess you're thinking in terms of a kind of a basic firefighting unit where maybe you had some people out there. It depends on the size of number of people and the kind of equipment that you have available to you, what you're going to do. But the thing that you've got to do when you go out there is try to stop the spread of the fire. And that means that your initial attack has got to be at the head of the fire. So that's the first thing that whoever's going to be the boss, that he has to consider, is where the worst part on the fire is. The side that's traveling and being carried by the wind is the one that's going to be the head of the fire, and it's going to spread that point. It'll branch out some from the sides, or from the flanks, as we call it, and it'll burn backwards against the wind a little bit, but the main spread and the hottest fire is going to be up at the end that's being pushed on by the fire into the fresh fuel. So that's the first thing that's got to be considered. So he's going to have to put his main resources that he has available to him, fire boss I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He's going to have them up on the front end of that fire and get that spread stopped. That's the first thing he's got to do. So he's got to consider where the head of the fire is, and the people that he's got back here to help him with it, and they'll have to try to cut that head off. And the first thing, and get the spread stopped. Then they work down on the sides and, or the flanks, and then around the tail end of the fire, and get it all enclosed. And then after that's once done, and during the time that the flanks are being closed in, he's got to have someone, what we call mop-up crew, to be sure that watch the line, see it doesn't break over, and then at the end, dead snags that are near the fire line, and all those things have to be made safe before they can go ahead and leave it. So that's whether he's got to use, that's his basic tactic that he's got to use to fight a spot of fire. And whether he has just a few men out there with some garden rakes and pine tops to beat it out, or whether he's got someone with a big high-powered and efficient fire plow crawler tractor that was built and developed for that purpose. He's still got those things to go through. So, but he can do it a whole lot easier and a whole lot faster if he's got special equipment for it. But if he doesn't, he's still got to go through those same things in order to take care of it.
Have firefighting methods changed much?
Oh yeah, there's no. It doesn't resemble since I've been working. The present firefighting organization doesn't resemble what we used to have. I think when I first went to work, we had possibly in this whole southeast area, we had possibly 2 or 3 old four-wheel tractors, and they had some drag plows on the back of them, and all the rest of the firefighting was strictly done with hand tools. We didn't have any. That's about all we had. And then as time went along, and in the early, I went to work in '49, and in 1950, I guess it must have been 52, there was one old Caterpillar crawler tractor that they did develop back before I came. In fact, it was already gone when I came, but Mr. Glenn Durrell and Bill Mitchell and some more of them got this thing developed, and they did do some fire suppression with that old tractor. Then they didn't have any more crawler tractors until along about 1952 when they bought 2 of these little Oliver crawlers, this little Oliver that we have out in front on display here in the center, and another one just like it, and we put those things to work along with some of these Ford tractors that we had. And none of them were hydraulically operated. They were all just, you might call them drag plows. And so that was the rest. We'd cover the worst fires that we could, and fires that we could plow. We'd try to send our plows, and as long as we had plows to them, and then it was strictly hand work, and that went on clear on up. I guess up until late, up into the 60s, and then we had enough money appropriated until they began to get John Deere tractors with regular developed fire plows on them that were hydraulic operated to keep them up and down, and to apply force to remove the rubble on the ground.
Now, what do you do with the fire plow?
A fire plow? Okay,
Yeah.
A fire plow is when we go out there, we're not interested in plowing deep like we plow a field or anything like that, getting ready for row crops. All we want to do is to remove the fuel from the ground so that there'll be some kind of a barrier there to backfire, back into the fire, and let the backfire burn into the oncoming fire, and they'll burn together and play out due to the lack of fuel. And that fire plow is strictly to make a line for them to backfire against, and also then later. Well, on these, of course, when we were doing it with, with a plow, those lines that they plow with the modern tractors that we have now, it'll depend on how rocky it is and a lot of those things. But I guess on an average of fairly good plowing out in the woods where they don't have fairly good plowing, it'll be about 5 feet wide, something like that. But of course, when they backfire against it, and I say they start this backfire on the inside back toward the burning fire, and as it burns that material going back into the main fire, it effectively widens that barrier so that when the fire all burns together, it's going to happen some distance from the fire, and we don't have so many sparks that blow over and so forth. But that's a pretty good line. But back with the fire crews, we had to make a trail that was probably about 12 or 14 inches just with a hand rake that we used, and then backfire against it. And it had to be watched pretty close, but that's what we did there. And as it was backfired and burned on out, then it would gradually be widened. And then with the old drag plows that we had, possibly sometimes we'd have a 2 or 3 foot wide trail out there, and which was a lot safer than our hand constructed trail. But that was.
You ever spend time in a tower?
Oh, not an awful lot. I never was a towerman. I have, done maintenance.
Now, those towers strictly to look for fires?
Yeah, right. That's their reason for being there. And of course, they were most of the towers that were established early, and that was before aircraft was developed and so forth. And they were placed at strategic points around over the area so that most of the area would be covered by. If this tower couldn't see it, the next one over could, And of course, we in the past few years, the department's laid by some of our towers, several of them. Still, some of our main towers are still in existence, and that's what they're used for, is for fire detection. And that's been supplemented. And the reason we were able to abandon some of them was the fact that we have air surveillance now more than we used to have. Weyerhauser they furnish some air surveillance, and then the state also contracts out.
What about satellites? Do they look for fires?
Oh, possibly in U.S. Forest Service, there's a possibility that they get some of their information that way, but not in this state. We don't have.
When before aircraft came in, how long would a man stay in a tower at one time?
As a general rule, in fire season, which ordinarily was in the spring and then maybe in the late summer when we had real bad fire conditions due to droughty conditions, the usual tower duty probably would be from about 10 o'clock in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. But with the increase in fire danger and the amount of fires that we're having and everything, sometimes that towerman would stay up there till 10, 11 o'clock at night, and he was back on maybe 7 or 8 o'clock.
Now was
the next morning when it was real bad fire conditions. I can't really, and I wouldn't be surprised, but there was times when they would keep a towerman up maybe all night for some particular purpose. It might be watching for new fires, in real extreme burning conditions.
Was the fire control manned at all times, 24 hours a day?
The fire?
The tower.
The tower?
Yeah.
No, not really. there's usually, when we've got fire danger, there's usually someone there, and he's around, but so far staying up in the tower itself, it's all done usually by one person. This time of the year, mostly the fire duty will be from about 10 in the morning till about 5 in the afternoon. But if it gets real bad, well, it might have to be extended to both ends of the day.
Now the State Forest Division that you work for, the fire control, did that include the National Forest also?
No, this was state organization. We cooperated with, up on the Ouachita National Forest, that was out of, well, their forest headquarters and supervisor is at Hot Springs, and then they have the ranger districts that were over in Oklahoma, and let's see what they call it. It was a Kiamish Ranger District that extended over into our state, and their responsibility bordered the southeast area on the north, which would be down into southeast part of LaFourche County, Rich Mountain and Kiamish Mountain, and Winding Stair and Kiamish are offshoots of Rich Mountain actually. But they had that area in there, and they worked up to that county, to their district boundary, and we worked up to where their responsibility was. And of course they came on over into the state, in certain cases, over into state responsibility, and we overlapped too, it was a kind of a trade-off thing.
Yeah. When is that National Forest set up?
Ouachita National Forest, I'm really not real sure, but I would say it was probably set up in the real early 20s, and it might have been prior to that time. Now, Mr. Durrell was with, Glenn Durrell was with Ouachita National Forest up in, not too far from Minas, where his, Odin was his ranger district back in the middle 20s, just prior to his coming to Oklahoma. And they were already a pretty good organization at that time, so I'm guessing it was somewhere around in the 20s, but my information on that's not official. We'd have to dig that up someplace to get it right.
Well, let me see. What else you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the Forest Heritage Center. I'm real proud of this thing. And we touched on how it kind of all got started, and how it was conceived and all got going. But back in the early 1960s, there was a big fair exhibit in the state fair in Oklahoma City. We had I don't remember what the square footage was of the area that was available to us in the agriculture building up there at the state fairgrounds. And the State Forestry Division, the people from the Extension Service out of OSU, and the private industry, and then the U.S. Forest Service, part of the Ouachita were involved in it. A lot of people were involved in it, and we got together a big kind of I guess you'd call it one-time fair exhibit up there during the state fair. And we had enough room there. We had exhibits that were placed not in a chronological sequence like we've done here, but they were on different subjects, and the visitors could walk from one to another, clear on around, and see a kind of an orderly exhibit that was pretty extensive. And the U.S. Forest Service loaned us Harry Russell, who was a U.S. Forest Service artist, and he's the one that came up with the idea of Smokey Bear for the U.S. Forest Service back in the earlier days prior to you know, the way we use him now. And he drew Smokey and has, as an artist and as a U.S. Forest Service employee, built exhibits along those lines. And so they let us have Harry up at the state fair up there for to do these backgrounds for these exhibits that we were doing up there. They weren't cases like we have in the museum, but they were kind of booths, you might call them. And there was one on wildlife, and one on different types of timber management, one on the importance of forest and water and all those things. But anyway, it was 1962, so Harry came, spent about 90 days up at Oklahoma City, and I had the pleasure of working with Harry most of the time that he was up there. I used to do silk screen printing in my job, and I did a lot of silk screen work for that project up there. And so Harry and one of his assistants were up there all during the time that thing was being prepared. Other people that were real involved in that thing were Lee Clymer. He was from the Extension Service. He was an extension forester. And he and Al Engstrom, who was later state forester in Oklahoma, and they were two that did a lot of the coordination, you know, and all. But of course, there were so many people involved in it. Anyway, when this thing all gelled, this Forest Heritage Center kind of all gelled, well, that was the first thing that everybody got to thinking about was that big exhibit we'd had back about 15 years before in Oklahoma City. So one thing led to another, and contact was made with LaSalle, and he had been, in the meantime, retired, and so we prevailed on him to come out and look at the Forest Heritage Center. Lee Clymer had kept in touch with Harry pretty well after that other project was over with. And to make a long story short, Harry came and looked it over, and he was
Okay.
So he agreed to come and do the artwork for these things, and of course he knew what they wanted to do was to have have these exhibits in a chronological sequence and everything. So he helped put together a plan, and of course we've had to stray from the original plan a little bit and change as things went along. But anyway, he started, we got, I guess in 1978, we got the first of these in out here, and he's still working on it. He does the murals in his studio in Atlanta, Georgia. He's retired there in Atlanta. When he gets them all developed with the criticism of the program here of the Forestry Division, and from the advisory board, Forest Heritage Center advisory board, then he proceeds and does a big mural. And so we're about halfway through that project. There'll be about 15 of them all together, and we have about 7 now. And so we hope that one of these days we get those things finished. And so they are kind of the thing that we're working around. And then other people have come in, have brought things into the center in the way of artifacts. The OSU Forestry Department has been very helpful. Of course, our state forestry division, state forestry division under the State Department of Agriculture. A lot of private citizens that were interested in forestry, or they felt like they had things that might be interesting to us, they'd bring them up, and if they fit in, well, we were glad to get them. And so the community, you might say, has been real helpful. Weyerhauser has been helpful in ways that they could. the smaller companies, Heron Industries in Idabel. Quintus Heron is their president, chairman of the board of directors of Forest Heritage Center Advisory Board. And then other, just to kind of give you an example about the different people that are involved in the thing. It's not, a lot of people kind of have the idea that the Forest Heritage Center is something just to promote the forest industry, but really we're not, because we've got a lot of people that are on our board of directors that are foresters or know something about forestry, that have no connection with any timber company now. George Bledsoe is with Weyerhauser. He's one of our board of directors. He's recently appointed. Then John Burwell, whom you interviewed yesterday, is a real estate man. He's a graduate forester himself. And he has been on the board of directors from the very beginning of this thing. Jerry Craig, who's a descendant of the old Dierks family that was in here, he's in the land development business. He developed the shopping center that we have here in Broken Bow with some other people, and he and the family have an oil distributorship, gasoline distributorship here in Broken Bow. Paul Fuller is with the U.S. Forest Service in Idabel. He's the one in charge of the Teoh district on Ouachita. Quintus Heron's the chairman of our board of directors, and he's with the Heron Industries. He's a forester himself. Rector Johnson is he was superintendent of the public schools here at Broken Bow for about 25 or 30 years, maybe a little more. Ted Kimbrough, who is retired now, but he was director of the Chamber of Commerce and Agriculture in Idabel for many years. Jack Lane, who's a former automobile dealer. Wally Lichty is a retired, Jack is retired. Wally Lichty is another one that worked for Weyerhauser, and before that for Dierks in land acquisition, and he's also a forester. He's retired now. He's on our board of directors. Jim Monroe is the publisher of our papers here in the county, both from Curtin Gazette and Broken Bow News. Paul Rober is a former Weyerhauser and Dierks employee, and he's now with Nakusa Edwards paper company, which has a plant over across the state line at Ashdown, Arkansas. Jack Tucker's in the trucking business, and he has some other interests. R.L. Wallace is a former Weyerhauser and Dierks man. He retired as a superintendent of the Wright City complex over here a few years ago. He's retired now. Dennis Wilson, who's a younger member of our board of directors, he's with the Soil Conservation Service, Little River Soil Conservation District in Idabel. So really, we're not really tied down to. That's kind of long-winded, but I couldn't explain it any other way. But it's been a kind of a smattering of individuals from all different occupations and businesses within the area that have been into this thing. So we're real proud of it from that standpoint. And as I said, a lot of people, when they first think about it, they think, well, that's something that the timber companies have put up here to as a public relations tool, but it's they've been a part of it, and a very vital part of it, but a lot of other people have been involved in it also. So
when was the building built?
The building was built, construction was started on it, I think, in about 75 or 76, and it was actually finished about and turned over to the board after construction in July of 1976. And that's when we had a lot of empty cases back there with nothing in them, and that's when all these people came to our rescue, and we started getting artifacts and pictures to copy, and this, that, and the other thing. Start building this thing, and I really feel like it's been quite a development for the amount of funds that have been available to us and everything. Oh, another thing I want to tell you about that was made available to us is a scale model of a big paper machine, which paper is pretty important in the timber industry anymore. And as you probably know, Weyerhauser has a big plant at Wright City, at Valiant, and they put in this last year in I guess it was finished in January of last year, was their third big paper machine that they have running over there. It makes craft paper, and they used this scale model over there for construction purposes. And so when they got that thing in and everything, they donated it to us. That scale model that we have down here, we don't have it all ready for display yet, but that thing cost them about $750,000 just to construct this scale model. So we feel like that we've got a one of a kind down there in that one, and it didn't cost us anything. They just donated it to the center. But a lot of stuff that we have come to us from individuals that way, as well as that particular one.
Anything else in the center?
Oh, I don't know. I really can't think of anything particular that I need to mention, I guess.
I was going to ask, how come Dierks sold out?
Well, I really couldn't answer that. I imagine for one thing, possibly it had gotten to where it was a pretty big operation, and some of the older Dierks people, well, all the original founders, of course, were long gone, and some of the younger members, and Weyerhauser, of course, had been out on the West Coast in Washington and Oregon, mostly in Washington, I think, and they were interested in expanding their holdings back this way, and they came along and offered this Dierks organization a good price for it. They bought it. They bought this operation here in Oklahoma, and also right across the line in Arkansas. It's all connected together and separated by the state line. And then they, at the same time, they bought out some assets over in North Carolina, and I think maybe they have some down in Georgia, Mississippi now that they've acquired. They've just kept branching out. It's just one of those changes in the corporate structure.
Okay.
I hope I haven't rattled on giving you a lot of details that you didn't want, but
that's what we want.
I have to tell it in my own way. So
we want to hear
yeah.
We wanted the history of this place.
Right. Yeah. I definitely wanted that in there.
Also, we wanted the firefighting.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing, we're taking all the interviews, and all of them are getting a good story, a little from each one, so we're getting a good overview.
Yeah. Well, that's good because, one thing, some of these other people that were been involved, when you talk to them, maybe they can get some of my mistaken recollections corrected. So,
well, I think we have a pretty good interview.
Well, good.
Okay. Anything else?
I can't think of anything else, Joe.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Came down and doing this. We appreciate this cooperative thing, but it'll make a lot of things available to us that we haven't had the facilities to do for ourselves, and that's part of our thing that we're doing here is to try to preserve things from the past, because it's all connected in our heritage, and that's what we are as a Forest Heritage Center. We're interested in things that are going on now and things that are to come, but we have to have a lot of this basic information from the past to do the things we need to do, and it's very vital, and this will give us an opportunity to have some of that stuff. So we sure appreciate your interest in coming down here and doing
I'm
this.
glad to do it. So I appreciate your help in helping me get some contact.
Well, any time that we can help you along that line, well, we'd be glad to.